hand sanitizer, masks, somber news reports with super scary graphs. The quiet of a world in lockdown. 3 years on from the peak of the coronavirus pandemic, there are still as many questions as there are answers.
All our experiences were different, but there's one thing that everyone agrees on. Bats. Those amazingly adapted flying mammals are a reservoir for coronaviruses. They're full of the stuff, and other nasties too.
Traces which are thousands and thousands of years old.
As humans encroach more and more on the natural environment of bats, these mammals are forced to munch on human crops or get closer to farmed animals in search of food.
We could be the cause of making pathogens more likely to be able to infect ourselves.
The closer they are to other animals and people, the higher the chance that a virus could spill over into the human population. And a disease that jumps from animals to people is what we call a zoonotic disease.
Diseases which could cause pandemics, the likes of which we've never seen before.
Time and time again in this series, we've seen how the tension between nature and humanity has boiled over in unexpected ways, leading to massive consequences for the planet.
Today, bats are under threat of extinction around the world, but their fight for survival may influence the health of every single one of us.
From the Natural History Museum, this is Our Broken Planet, where we find out how we created some of the problems in our modern world and search for solutions from nature and science. I'm Khalil Thurlaway.
And I'm Tori Herridge. In this episode, we're investigating how the destruction of wildlands and the rise of intensive farming is increasing the risk of something that could affect us all, zoonotic diseases. So you're the expert, Khalil, right? Zoonosis or zoonosis?
It's probably kind of a glacier type
Okay, well, you know I'm rubbish here then, so I'm going to do both.
Honestly, I'm not too fussed about the distinction. It's people talk about zoonoses or zoonoses. It's a pronunciation thing. I'm fine with either.
I personally prefer zoonoses. Like you've got like a little zoo nose on. Like I'm wearing my tiger nose. You can put on the anteater. I don't know. James out there on the desk is, crocodile. And there's, we've all got it going on, sort of snapping away. Go on, Dr. Khalil Thurlaway. Tell us, what is a zoonotic disease?
A zoonotic disease, or a zoonosis, is a disease that is caused by an infective organism, like a parasitic organism or a virus or a bacterium, that is transferred from non-human animals to humans and can cause sickness and disease in those humans.
So, give us some examples. COVID being the obvious one.
COVID's a big recent one. Another scary virus people might know is Ebola. There's Nipah virus. But there are also lots of kind of gastrointestinal parasites like Giardia. You might have heard of toxoplasmosis that people can get from cats. So they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes.
Yeah, and of course, for the ones you've listed there, COVID, Ebola, Nipah, the one thing I know they've all got in common is bats. It is really interesting that bats are this like massively well-known reservoir of viruses.
It's funny that you used the word reservoir there, because that is the metaphor we use to talk about animals that can be a kind of holding place for these diseases that can jump into people.
Yeah, it's like they're sort of sitting there, you store water in a reservoir. These things store viruses, not deliberately, but it's just a fact. They're hanging out there waiting for somewhere to go.
And bats have some really, really interesting adaptations to their immune system and the rest of their physiology that means that sometimes, actually, they don't suffer from the viruses that they carry. And it's only when they jump into other organisms like humans that you see the symptoms.
And it's this ability that bats have to survive diseases that are deadly to humans that's the focus of cutting-edge research in medicine right now. And the secret to their success may lie in their evolution.
Viruses and their hosts coexisted for millions of years because the viruses needs a host to exist. That's the whole point of it.
This is Dr. Amelia Skiermont, an evolutionary virologist at Oxford University.
And in case of bats, they're one of the oldest orders of mammals. So we know that they also coexisted with viruses for a very, very long time.
Bats have been around on our planet much longer than humans. The oldest bat fossils we've found are 52 million years old.
We also know that they can get infected with viruses very deadly to other animals, like, for example, Ebola, like rabies, like Hendra Nipah. All of these viruses, which, if they will infect us, they will easily kill us. But bats seem not to be affected that much by these viruses.
Because bats have been up close and personal with viruses for so long, they've developed a few tricks to survive diseases that would kill other mammals.
All right, this is where I enter immunologist mode.
I'm so excited. I want a lesson. Go.
So basically, your immune system is kind of like your military of your body, and it identifies incoming threats and it tries to fight them off. But just like a military, it can often cause a lot of collateral damage, and that often comes in form of inflammation and tissue damage. And so immune systems have mechanisms of balancing between how much they will tolerate other organisms living in our body and how much they will try and clear them out.
So what's going on with bats then?
So bats have a mixture of kind of higher tolerance and less inflammatory responses.
They're the diplomats of the immune system.
Yeah, and bats and other flying animals need a much higher energy input as well. So you can't afford to be lazing around sick if your body is using up energy faster than other animals.
And you can see why people working on these questions are so interested in the way that bats' immune system works.
And it goes beyond viruses, because our immune system isn't just this kind of defense force against external threats. It's also really interconnected with all sorts of other body systems as well.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of think like, could bats be the answer to a long and happy, healthy life?
Viruses don't leave fossils because they're just a bunch of genetic material in a protein layer. But there is one way we know about their evolutionary history.
And Amelia's doing detective work on how ancient viruses leave their mark in bats' very genes.
Some viruses can leave traces in their hosts' genomes. That is mostly traces which are thousands and thousands of years old. These traces can be passed over generations. That's why we see them. Our idea was that maybe bats have more of them and can use them to help them either prevent or make them less susceptible to severe infection. These traces, these signals would be like an echo of old musical pieces played on old musical instruments. In the same way, we see these old viral signals in our present genes.
The music of the far ancient past.
Poetic. But I love this idea of the traces of the past being kind of embedded in our DNA. But it is crazy to think of viruses as not just kind of coming in, messing stuff up and leaving, but
Staying.
actually depositing a record of their stay.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically all 50% virus, if you look at the stats. I mean, it's amazing. So much of our DNA are basically fossils of the viruses that our ancestors caught. It just shows you how complex and amazing our world is.
And there's evidence that 400 million years ago, a virus infected what ended up being the common ancestor of all four-legged creatures on land. So birds, mammals, amphibians, reptiles.
Yeah, isn't that right? I mean, it's even been the implication being that might have been one of the triggers. That it might be linked to that transition to things moving out of the ocean and onto the land. It's mad.
And we know this because of the genes that virus left in our ancestor that then got passed down to all of us.
Yeah.
This is why diseases are cool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they are very cool. They have a massive impact on our day-to-day life, but also it's just that part, that kind of like, that almost like the hidden part of the world that we don't think about as being, we think of it as being something other, but it's not other. It's so integral to us, and it's so part of us that we have to understand it if we want to understand ourselves.
Yeah, and, like Amelia was talking about these echoes of old musical pieces, it's like we're hearing echoes of an old symphony, and we only recognize some of the instruments and some of the musical motifs, and the rest we're having to infer and build upon to make this picture of what it came from.
You can see it happening in real time, right? So you can see viruses moving in. People are getting sick more often from these zoonotic viral events because viruses can move around, obviously. In the last 40 years, infectious diseases basically emerged at 4 times the rate of previous decades. And most of these diseases are ones that have come from animals.
And as humans encroach more into wild areas, it's only a matter of time before a new virus spills over. In fact, it's already happened in South Asia.
In Bangladesh, we have very little amount of forest left, so people are everywhere. So bears have no place to go, so they are living inside the community, very close contact with people.
Dr. Rajib Ausraful Islam is a veterinary researcher working at the International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research in Bangladesh. He focuses on Nipah virus, a deadly disease carried by bats.
So Nipah virus is a deadly pathogen, most carried by bats. In Bangladesh, it is carried by Pteropus medius bats. And for more than a decade, we are having Nipah virus outbreak in different areas of Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, it comes to human through date palm sap, a delicacy in Bangladesh. And the case fatality rate due to this virus infection is more than 70%. That means if you get the infection, the chance is more than 70% that you will die.
Nipah virus is most often transmitted to humans through ingesting the sap of the date palm, a local delicacy for humans and bats. Because of how their immune systems work, there's a high viral load in these bats. So all it takes is a bit of animal byproduct, like saliva or urine, to transmit the disease.
It is very tasty. It is light, sweet, and clear, transparent, juice-like liquid, and anyone will like it. But the problem is there is a huge chance of bat-borne pathogen infection. People shave the upper trunk of the tree, and mostly during the winter, and the sap drips from the trunk of the tree into a pot, and in the night, bats come to lick or feed on that sap. So if you drink sap contaminated with bat saliva or urine, which bat was shedding it at that time, you will get the infection.
Bats feed on the date palm sap because humans are creating the conditions for bats to be A, hungry, and B, able to access the sap.
Bats are opportunistic feeder. You see that date palm sap is not naturally available for them. Yeah, it is a product due to human intervention. But bats come to see what is there, and somehow they have learned to feed on this date palm sap.
As a response to this danger, the Bangladeshi government has actually moved to ban the drinking of raw date palm sap.
So if you do not drink date palm sap, raw date palm sap, you will not have the infection. And this is the recommendation of Bangladesh government also, not to drink raw date palm sap.
But it's not just that the bats are feeding on the date palms. Rajib and his fellow researchers are finding links between Nipah virus and domestic animals because of a lack of wild land in Bangladesh.
In Bangladesh, people live in very close contact with domestic animals like cattle and goat are the principal domestic animals of Bangladesh. And in our previous study, we have found cattle, dog, and cat positive for Nipah virus antibody, which means probably they had exposure to Nipah virus in the past. But we do not know whether they have any role in the transmission of this virus or not. So if we can identify or if we can detect that these animals also shed virus, even for a short period, then we have to think about an intervention to keep the animal away from the bats or bat roosts, to reduce contact with bats, those kind of things. You know, bats did not come to actually our habitat. Humans invaded into bats' habitat. But now we have to find out a way so that all animal species, including humans, can live peacefully.
And Rajib has a simple suggestion: planting more trees.
If we can plant fruit trees which are edible to only bats, which are not edible to humans, as a result there will be no competition. Maybe by planting such trees will reduce competition between bats and humans. Probably they will try to feed less on date palm sap, more on those fruits.
Basically, it's our old friend, humans encroaching on wilderness again. And then something bad happens.
Tale as old as time.
Yeah.
And Bangladesh in particular has lost a huge amount of forest cover. From 2001 to 2022, they lost over 200,000 hectares of tree cover, which is, over 10% of their forested area.
Yeah, that's a lot of wilderness gone. People have got to live somewhere. And and Bangladesh is also facing the other threat on the other end of things. People have got to live somewhere, and the water is rising, and it's a very low-lying country. So, where are people going to go?
And that's a really tricky balance that needs to be struck between the needs of people to have homes and livelihoods, and the needs to preserve the natural environment and to avoid the risks that come with degrading that and encroaching on that. Bangladesh is already one of the most densely populated countries in the world. And so, like you said, when they're trapped between an encroaching sea and a forest that might be giving them zoonotic diseases, they're in a really tough spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's like in that situation, like it's so difficult to live, in harmony, in inverted commas, with nature. Like it's so hard. And yet it is something that people try to do. Now, you look at the deforestation that we've discussed in Bangladesh. We had a whole episode, check it out, previously on deforestation when we focused on Indonesia. And yet, there is someone there who has found a way to live in harmony with some seriously big bats.
Dan Pulau Tangkuladi itu punya
The island has lots of trees where bats live or where they hang themselves upside down when they come home.
This is Pak Warman, a fisherman from Sulawesi, an island that makes up part of Indonesia. He's perhaps an unlikely advocate for the bat.
Kalau mereka terbang keluar,
There are so many of them. There are tens of millions of them. So the skies become darker. You cannot see the sunlight at 4:30 in the afternoon. The experience of living next door to bats, for me, I really love it.
Amat saya suka.
The bats that live on Warman's Island are Sulawesi flying foxes.
I'm looking at a picture right now, and they are beautiful. They've got this lovely golden fur around their collar, these big broad wings, and these huge round eyes for seeing at night.
Burung yang lain ketika dia pulang dari
These bats are extraordinary. When they come home, they hang themselves upside down.
Ketika dia pulang, dia menggantungkan diri.
Until 2014, the bats around Warman's village were being hunted. Sometimes to sell as food, but mostly because this flying fox was seen as a pest. They eat commercially farmed fruits, mangoes, cashews, wild bananas, avocados, and even the local specialty, durian. But Warman knows the value of these bats as pollinators.
If there are no bats, the durian will never bear fruit. If the bats are destroyed, or the durian will only be history.
Intinya tinggal sejarah.
Warman has worked with his fellow villagers to ban bat hunting and create a sanctuary for the bats on a smaller island just off the coast. It's this kind of bat conservation and activism that allows bats and humans the space and resources they need to live in harmony.
Now, we've talked about sharing space and sharing food. That list of fruits that the flying foxes eat, I've got to admit, my mouth's watering.
Have you ever seen a cashew?
Yeah, I've eaten cashew fruit. They're delicious.
And then, the first time I saw one, I couldn't believe it. It's this incredibly large fruit with a teeny, teeny nut on the bottom of each one.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never looked at a packet of cashew nuts in the same way again, because it shows you how many trees you would need for one packet.
This idea of a bat island is such a lovely example of how we can recognize that both humans and bats need and deserve their own space and resources to thrive.
So Warman's come up with a really sensible compromise. He's made space for the bats, but bats are everywhere, and they are part of the natural world, and we can't really, I think, aspire to a place. I hope not. Anyway, I don't want the future to be completely segregated. humans from nature, and never the twain shall meet.
And, like we've said with fires and smoke and pollution and things like that, bats neither understand nor respect human artificial boundaries like national borders and property lines and stuff like that.
I mean, there's a reason why they're like almost over the entire world, and that's because they can fly.
It's because they fly and they are curious and they're amazing.
Yeah.
And while it is really beautiful to share our environment with bats, it's also important to remember that, because they are so widespread and because of their relationship with viruses, all it takes is one mutation in one virus for the next zoonotic disease to break out.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's because viruses are part of nature.
Absolutely.
And so it's not a case you can separate. You're never going to stop this from happening.
No.
It's viruses are part of nature. We are part of the world. It's everything is interconnected, and part of that world, right all the way back into our deep evolutionary history, as we've already said, is about that movement. The fact that humans and viruses and animals, viruses and plants, viruses and everything are going to interact. So we have to find a way to live with it in the way that basically finds the best route through this tricky problem.
Yeah, and this narrative is often, these animals giving us their diseases, but it's much more of a two-way street on that.
It's very much that pathogens are continually swapped. Like spillover is a daily event.
This is Dr. Dave Redding, the lead researcher on biodiversity and health at the Natural History Museum.
We know that we're part of this sort of network enmeshed in the kind of complexity and the network of biodiversity itself.
Dave's interested in how pathogens are swapped back and forth between humans and animals.
Part of that is that we're sharing pathogens to the animals that are around us, and they're sharing them back.
As with Nipah virus, how humans are changing the landscape is driving animals and humans into closer proximity.
We create landscapes to suit ourselves, and I think, by doing that, we actually have quite a few sort of patterns to the landscapes that we create that we don't really know that we're doing it. If you imagine a more natural landscape that's, say, wooded, shrubs and more sort of rocky areas, we tend to have things like water available in lots of little pools in lots of places. So if an animal needs to drink, it can drink from one of many places. In a more urban landscape, those areas where an animal can drink are actually quite often really focused into, say, a water container or some kind of a bit of guttering that isn't draining properly. And those actually act to concentrate animals together.
As humans reduce the extent and richness of natural landscapes and the food sources available, animals have to make do with what they've got. And then there's farming.
Some of the changes that we're seeing is actually larger fields of single crops and much more sort of focus on irrigation and industrialization of agriculture.
Once again, this land change means we're rubbing shoulders with animals all the more often.
We've modified so much of the landscape and we're in so much of the landscape that we're probably a really important part of actually giving pathogens back to wild animals. So you could imagine a pathogen is poorly adapted to humans and spills over, but there's so many of us that the likelihood of it spilling over and it doesn't have a huge effect on that person, but then it spills back and it's slightly more adapted to humans at that point, and then maybe it spends some time swapping between individuals of the same species or cross species and gaining this ability to be more general in its ability to evade immune systems of mammals more generally. And so I think it's really interesting thinking that actually we could be the cause of kind of making pathogens more likely to be able to infect ourselves just by the fact that there's so many of us contacting so many animals.
Yeah, it's good to be reminded of that perspective. Everyone spends so much time worrying about the disgusting thing they might catch from a rat, getting into their food or something like that in the kitchen, and don't think about the fact that they might give the rat a disease. No one thinks about the rats.
Yeah, right. And we've talked about human populations and our effect on biodiversity, deforestation, stuff like that in this series. But this other kind of existential risk is so much harder to see, but also has a really profound effect.
Because these are big problems that cross over multiple different subjects, disciplines, fields of study, expertise areas, and all of these people need to come together to bring the different perspectives to understand it.
It is definitely a puzzle. I think it's a puzzle that has kind of serious real-world consequences. But I think about it as we are mostly in the dark, occasionally shining a bit of light on something that even when you shine a light on it, it's not that easy to understand. And we've all got these really different takes on when you shine a light in the dark and you see something. We all see it slightly differently.
Got your torch?
Got mine here.
Double torchlight, head torch as well, shine the lights on everything, all the different people. No, I do like that analogy. I mean, it is that thing, isn't it? All puzzles are basically, that they're there. The answer is there somewhere. You just need to locate it, with the right skills and enough hands.
Yeah, and it kind of creates a built-in humility that's really important.
You aren't the only one who's going to fix this.
Yeah, it challenges this idea that there's going to be, someone who's going to come along, probably from a richer country, more privileged background, is going to come along and solve this problem with this one kind of realization. And this kind of feeds into a concept known as One Health. And One Health is a relatively new way of looking at health, and it combines human, non-human, and environmental health. So instead of looking at them as separate things, they're looked at as different parts, different facets of the same interconnected relationship, because our health depends on the health of the planet and animals, and vice versa.
And we better hope we do get our act together and get all those torches shining, as brightly and as efficiently as possible, because zoonotic diseases are continuing to rear their heads. In 2023, we've got the issue of avian influenza or bird flu.
You could argue that all flu is bird flu. There's some genetic evidence to suggest that influenza spilled over to humans from ducks or other waterfowl around 4,000 years ago.
Yeah,
so not that long.
No, and there've been sporadic outbreaks ever since, right? First recorded instance of fowl plague was in Italy in 1878.
But it was the devastating so-called Spanish flu that tore across the world in 1918 and 1919 that has had the biggest impact. It's estimated that between 50 and 100 million people died during that pandemic, which is more than the First World War, which came right before it.
Yeah, just such big numbers. And then you've got, fast forward, there's some other influenza outbreaks in between, but fast forward to 1996, and a new strain of bird flu emerged in China, H5N1. It first infected geese, and then it moved to chicken farms, and all the chickens in Hong Kong were destroyed in 1997 and 1998 to control the virus.
Now, unfortunately, that virus re-emerged in 2003, and it spread into the wild bird population. This outbreak was especially concerning because H5N1 can infect humans.
To date, 868 people have caught this strain of bird flu, and 457 of them have died. That sets the fatality rate at 53%, which is very, very high. Yeah. It's a real cause for concern for disease experts.
And this is relevant now in 2023 because bird flu has once again got the world in its talons. As of July this year, 81 countries have reported ongoing outbreaks of H5N1 bird flu, and it's spreading to other animals too.
And this is your reminder that if you see a sick or dead bird, be very careful. Please don't touch it. Take reasonable precautions, report it to the appropriate authorities, and be sure to wash your hands thoroughly with soap and water.
In Europe right now, we're currently undergoing the biggest ever recorded outbreak of bird flu. And obviously we're culling tens of millions of birds across Europe.
This is Ed Winters. Online, he goes by the handle Earthling Ed.
And so the problem is there are always outbreaks. It's not something that stops. There are constantly outbreaks somewhere around the world.
Bird flu is having huge impacts on poultry farming right now. Over 200 million agricultural birds, mostly chickens, have been culled in the last 18 months, and untold numbers of wild birds have died as a result of this disease.
I've been on dairy farms, I've been on beef farms, I've been on poultry farms, pig farms, and I think for me as an activist, it was important to kind of see that firsthand and have that experience to be able to describe it.
Ed is the co-founder of Surge Activism, a non-profit campaigning group for animal rights.
When you walk into an industrial chicken farm, especially, the two things that shocked me at the scale of these barns, huge barns, 30, 35, even 40,000 chickens crammed into just one barn. And so the scale of it took my breath away, but also the smell. You wear the biohazard suits. It's very important that you make sure that you decontaminate yourself, wear the appropriate outfit so that you're not spreading any diseases. You're taking all precautions as you should. But even with these masks and things on, the smell hits you, the ammonia, the stench of the feces, because these chickens are just living in these barns.
No one likes the sound of that. I defy anyone to go, well, that's lovely. No, that's got to be pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, and I was struck by that description of the biohazard suits, which, those all-body white or yellow suits, kind of Darth Vader-y, sci-fi. It's something that we don't really imagine when we think about farming. Like, I've worn them in biohazard labs.
Yeah.
But, when you think of farming, you imagine a big field, maybe some cows.
It's all very bucolic.
A light breeze rippling the fields. But the reality is that poultry workers have to take really serious precautions because they know that they're in danger of both being infected and infecting the birds with diseases.
Yeah, basically it makes it pretty clear that there's like an inherent problem there, right? And that's exactly what Ed thought too.
The problem we have with intensive agriculture, in particular when it comes to bird flu and indeed swine flu, is that we're housing, as I said with birds earlier, tens of thousands of birds in one space. That provides an incredible opportunity for a virus to mutate and spread.
Scientists are pointing to the ever-increasing intensity of animal farming as a cause for the mutation and emergence of new strains of virus.
Yeah. For example, a steep increase in intensified goat farming in the Netherlands led to the emergence of Q fever in 2007.
Yeah, and growing numbers of camels in the Arabian Peninsula led to the MERS outbreak in 2012.
And it's no surprise that thousands and thousands of chickens living together in close quarters has led to new strains of devastating bird flu. There's over 35 billion farmed chickens out there. That's a lot of bodies for viruses to mutate in.
The issue that we have and the fear that we have is that a mutation will occur in these viruses, which means that the virus can not only spill over to humans, but actually causes threat to life as well. So the lethality and the contagion both are kind of brought up as a consequence of this genetic mutation. And that is one of the things that concerns, not just vegans, but of course, infectious disease experts the world over. Is the question is not if, it's always going to be a when.
And there's a solution that Ed is proposing to this problem, but not everyone's going to like it.
I would strongly argue that the simplest way to remove the biggest risk factors in the emergence of bird flu and swine flu diseases is to remove the birds and pigs from the farms in the first place. If we remove intensive pig farming, intensive bird farming, and these systems of farming in the first place, we're removing the biggest driver in the emergence of these diseases.
So you would say that, Ed, because you're a vegan activist.
I would say that, but I'm also a vegan activist that's driven by facts and by science and by data. And whilst, of course, removing the chicken farms would fulfill my goal of no longer having cruel systems of food production, or at least, minimizing these cruel systems of food production, it also serves another purpose, which is that it helps us as a species because it removes the biggest risk factor in the emergence of diseases which could cause pandemics, the likes of which we've never seen before.
That feeling of needing to do something motivated Ed to start his YouTube channel, and he's been a full-time vegan educator for a few years now. And although full veganism would be his ultimate goal, I asked him what steps we can take along the way.
What can the consumer do to make an ethical choice? What is your advice to somebody in the supermarket choosing their next dinner?
Choose plants over animals. In a situation when we have the option to choose plants over animals, will of course reduce the risk of many of these issues we've spoken about. So simply choose plants over animals.
Can you imagine a world where there is no farming of animals?
Yeah, I think that's highly unlikely. I don't think that the world is set up. It's complex. Environments are very different. Socioeconomic situations are very different. I think it's highly unlikely that that's the case. I think that when we talk about the problem, we're talking mainly about affluent nations where the intensification of animal farming originated from and where still to this day is the most pernicious. And I think that in these countries, our environmental impact is higher than the global average. And so the changes that we make are actually more important than the global average. And so, no, not a world, but I think the countries where it needs to happen most are also the countries where it can happen.
Yeah, we often talk about, individual versus big system, but actually this is one of the easiest things that an individual can do. It's a very easy life hack, really.
Yeah.
Just eat less meat.
I'm going to hold my hands up. I'm not a vegan.
No, me either.
But, let's be real. It is possible to make choices that reduce the amount of meat and animal product in your diet. And I've been trying to do that. I can't really, with a straight face, come on this show and talk to people about our relationship with the world around us without at least making some changes in my life. That idea of change as a direction rather than a destination, I think is a good way to think about changing our individual and societal lives.
Yeah, you're never going to be vegan because you're never going to give up the jellyfish. Let's face it. It's a jellyfish episode. Please check it out. I mean, I do find that articulating these things, it makes a change. If you say to yourself, I will eat less meat, then it does tend to happen. It's one of those really simple changes. Just stop, as Ed says, in the supermarket, choice of 2 items, a little nudge towards the vegetable one. The plant-based one it's a really simple thing to do, and all the data suggests that it's one of the biggest impacts that you can make on greenhouse gas emissions. And then you've got the lovely bonus of maybe killing less fluffy animals.
And change can be a little bit scary. Like changing a lifestyle that you've got used to, that you like, that you've tailored to your own preferences. It can be uncomfortable, but often you discover really cool stuff once you open that door that you had left shut for a while.
Yeah, it is. I think it is one of the few things. I mean, I try my best, but definitely, I sort of when I saw the data on the impact of eating meat, and I made a very simple decision to myself to say, okay, I will not eat meat during the week. What you end up doing is not eating meat at the weekend either, because you discover it.
Oh, see, I had this image of you like a werewolf waking up on Sunday, surrounded by bloody carcasses. And
No, cause, I guess that's it, isn't it? Right? Because I was never one of the world's carnivores, so it wasn't a hard decision for me to make, because I'm probably a natural, a sort of vegetarian, plant-based eating person anyway.
And it also has the added bonus of potentially keeping us safer from zoonotic diseases. Because I don't know about you, but for me, lockdown sucked. And if I can avoid another one of those in future, I'll change my diet a little bit here and there.
Yeah, and we've got the knowledge to do that. Right? We've got people working on all these things. We have the knowledge, we have the understanding, and that gives us the power to change what we do. Because basically, forewarned is forearmed. So, on that note, thanks for listening to Our Broken Planet. We hope you've learned something along the way, and please don't despair. We all have an important role to play in helping to fix the problems in our world, so eat less meat. And it starts with having conversations like the ones in this episode, as many as possible. If you found it helpful, why not share this episode with friends and family?
Let us know what you thought about this episode and join the conversation on social media using the hashtag OurBrokenPlanet, or check out the bonus content and resources over on nhm.ac.uk/podcast.
Next time, we're throwing open our windows and breathing in the sweet, sweet smell of air pollution.
Don't you just love the smell of particulate matter in the morning?
Our Broken Planet is presented by Khalil Thurlaway and me, Tori Herridge. The producer was Leonie Thomas, the series producer was James Tyndale, and the executive producer was Will Yates. Our Broken Planet is a Whistledown production for the Natural History Museum.